Have you heard about the 8 Ozaki challenges? It's a legendary tale about the 8 extreme challenges that represent the pinnacle of human endurance. This story is from a movie that adventure sports enthusiasts revere as a masterpiece. It's the kind of film that, after watching, leaves you with an overwhelming and lingering emotional impact. Utah and his brother Jeff are famous extreme sports athletes on short video platforms. This time, they challenge each other to cross treacherous hills without any established paths. Jeff is hesitant, but Utah, ever the fearless one, encourages his good brother. "Just try it, follow me, and you'll be fine." The two brothers then embark on a wild adventure across the dangerous hills. With their expert driving skills, they manage to safely navigate the rugged terrain. When they reach the edge of a cliff, Utah leads the way, soaring over the edge and landing safely on a towering stone pillar opposite. But when Jeff follows, he fails to brake in time, and both he and his vehicle plummet straight into the abyss. Utah watches helplessly as his brother disappears before his eyes. 7 years later, tormented by guilt and remorse, Utah has completely abandoned his old life and enrolled in the police academy. From a free-spirited, undisciplined man who loved freedom, he has transformed into an FBI agent, strictly adhering to all rules and regulations. His boss questions Utah about his reckless past, but Utah responds that he is searching for the discipline he lacked before. However, the boss is skeptical, believing that Utah is avoiding the truth about his brother's death and challenging the depth of his desire to be a federal agent. Although Utah reiterates that the Bureau has checked his records, the boss remains doubtful and insists that Utah must prove himself worthy of the role of an FBI agent. During this time, several major unsolved cases emerged that left people baffled. The first case occurred at a 100-story jewelry company in Mumbai. 3 robbers on motorcycles suddenly burst in through the elevator room. They wore masks and stole 10 million carats of diamonds. To escape from the pursuit of security guards, they smashed through a glass wall and parachuted from the building, which was over 400 meters high. They then distributed all the diamonds to the poor. Current information shows that these criminals are still beyond the law. What kind of people are they dealing with? The second case occurred on a poor street in a remote village in Mexico. Cash suddenly rained down from the sky. The impoverished laborers joyfully ran to collect the bills falling from above. It turned out that 2 men dressed in black had secretly opened the cargo hold of a money transport plane flying overhead, throwing down 2 large crates of cash. Then, they both jumped out of the plane at an altitude of tens of thousands of meters and cut the ties of the money bundles, causing tens of millions of dollars to scatter in the air. The two then flew straight to a cave in the rainforest, only deploying their parachutes once deep inside the cave. Utah felt that the methods used by these criminals were very familiar. After searching through a large amount of materials, Utah rushed to his black boss. He suspected that these cases were actually connected. These criminals were likely trying to complete the 8 Ozaki challenges. The 8 Ozaki challenges are 8 extremely difficult, extreme sports challenges, proposed by the master of extreme challenges, Ozaki Ono, to express respect for nature. It is said that anyone who completes all the challenges will achieve nirvana, a complete transformation of body and mind. But until now, no one has completed all the challenges, and Ozaki Ono himself died during the 3rd challenge. Utah discovered that in an earlier case involving arson in a forest, several robbers, after setting the fire, used kayaks to navigate dangerous rapids on the Congo River. This was actually the first challenge in the 8 Ozaki challenges, force of gushing water. Some of these individuals then parachuted from the top of Mount Everest. This was the second challenge, birth of sky. They then descended rapidly into a cliffside cave before deploying their parachutes. This challenge is called Awakening of Earth. These robbers had completed the first 3 challenges. Now, their target was the 4th challenge, life of water. Based on data from the Meteorological Bureau, Utah discovered that the west coast of France was soon to experience a once-in-10-years tsunamis. He was certain that the 3 robbers would go there to complete the 4th challenge. So, Utah was sent to France to track the robbers' trail. At the Paris port, Utah met Agent Pappas, a veteran agent assigned to assist him. Pappas drove a high-speed boat and took him to the area where the tsunami waves were expected to appear. A large number of surfing enthusiasts had gathered there. Utah saw a beautiful woman skillfully riding the giant wave, successfully escaping its powerful pull. Utah was eager to try himself, but he had never faced waves as large as these. At that moment, someone else was preparing to take on the challenge. Utah broke the surfing rule by stealing the wave. According to usual rules, Utah should have backed off, but he still charged into the wave. The two appeared at the same time within the heart of the tsunami. The person ahead was almost free from the swirling waves, but Utah was a step too late and was slammed down into the sea, knocking him unconscious. As he unconsciously sank to the bottom of the sea, someone swam to his rescue. When Utah woke up, he found himself on a yacht. The person who had saved him was none other than the one he had stolen the wave from. His name was Bodhi. He had almost succeeded in the challenge, but missed his opportunity because he had saved Utah. Bodhi was very friendly, but a few of his friends were extremely cautious about Sans, this stranger. On the yacht, Utah met the skilled surfer he had seen earlier. It turned out she was also one of Bodhi's teammates. Her name was Samsara. Samsara gently led Utah to jump into the sea. They spent a romantic night in the embrace of the ocean. The next morning, Utah woke up and saw Bodhi sitting in front of him. Bodhi had actually known about Utah's reputation for a long time. He was unsure why a racer like Utah would appear here, but when he saw Utah surfing, he noticed a lack of respect for nature and advised him to leave soon. Pappas felt that Utah hadn't made any progress and wanted to take him back to the US, but Utah, the young and passionate man, refused to give up. He firmly believed that Bodhi and his friends were the criminals. He begged Pappas for more time, confident that he would find evidence. According to unofficial reports, Utah found Bodhi and his friends at an underground boxing ring in Paris. Once again, Bodhi's friends were both astonished and angry to see Utah. They questioned how Utah had found his way there, but Bodhi, as the leader, lied and claimed that he had shown Utah the way. It was clear that he liked the young man in front of him. Utah expressed his desire to join their group. Bodhi then challenged him to a fight. The two stripped down to their shirts and stood facing each other, throwing fierce punches as blood splattered. But clearly, Bodhi's fighting skills were stronger, and he knocked Utah out. Utah lost his chance to join the group, feeling deeply disappointed. However, Bodhi unexpectedly came back to him and extended an invitation to participate in the Ozaki challenge. Wind of the Flowing. Utah followed Bodhi's group to the Alps. Some of the members carried their luggage up the mountain. One of them asked Utah to take out the stone from his backpack. Utah stood there, stunned, asking, "What stone?" It turned out they had played a prank, placing a heavy stone into Utah's backpack. But the stone had a purpose. Bodhi told his teammates to prepare a stopwatch and then threw the stone down the cliff. 6 seconds later, they heard the stone hit the ground. They roughly estimated the cliff's height to be about 180 meters. That evening, some of the group used fire-starting techniques to light a campfire. Bodhi told Utah that they pursued the 8 Ozaki challenges not for the so-called nirvana that people talked about, but for the real purpose: to show others the beauty of the earth, to give back to this planet, not to demand anything. That was the path they were following. To achieve this, one must completely let go of the ego and let the heart guide the way. Bodhi concluded that if Utah walked this path with them, then dawn would be the answer. The next morning, 4 people wearing wingsuits prepared to begin the 4th challenge, Wind of the Flowing. The 4 lined up and soared through the valley. A wingsuit is different from a glider. It requires the flyer to feel the direction of the wind, merge with it, and move with it. Without that, one would fall into an abyss, never to recover. The 4 of them flew out of the mountain area, each deploying their parachutes one by one. In the end, they all safely landed on the meadow, successfully completing the Wind of the Flowing. The 4 embraced each other. In that moment, they finally accepted Utah, who had gone through life and death with them. Soon after, they began the 6th challenge, Frozen Crystallization. Bodhi found a snow mountain with no path in Italy. They had to ski from the peak to the base of the mountain. But when everyone saw where they were about to ski, they started to tremble. It was truly a meat grinder made of snow. This time, Utah, the new member, was the first to jump down. He seemed to have regained the daring, bold, and free-spirited nature he once had. Some people shook their heads but followed him down the cliff. The group quickly maneuvered through the hard rocks. A slight deviation that would result in being smashed to pieces. But God does not always favor the same group of people. This time, Gromit, one of the 4, slipped into a side path and panicked. The violent flip caused him to fall straight into the abyss. The remaining 3 skied to the finish line, only to realize one person was missing. Utah was frantic and wanted to go back to search for Gromit, as he had been the guide. When Utah blamed himself for choosing the path that led to Gromit's death and wanted to go back, Bodhi interrupted, asserting that Gromit had chosen that path for himself, and his death was not Utah's fault. The group found Gromit's body and performed a traditional cremation ceremony for him. Utah was consumed with guilt and drowned his sorrows in alcohol alone. Samsara approached him and shared her story. It turned out that Samsara was the adopted daughter of the extreme sportsmaster Ozaki Ono, and Bodhi was a disciple of Ozaki. Ozaki did not die in the 3rd challenge, Awakening of Earth, as the rumors suggested. He had actually completed that challenge. Ozaki Ono was killed by a speeding whaling ship in the Atlantic Ocean while trying to stop their cruelty. The young man who had been on the boat with Ozaki Ono at that time survived. That man was Bodhi. Perhaps that was why Bodhi was so determined to complete the 8 Ozaki challenges. He had inherited his master Ozaki's path, but it had become an obsession for him. As they shared their feelings, the hearts of the two young people grew closer. Eventually, they shared a passionate kiss. The next day, Bodhi took Utah to a mining area that had been exploited for resources over the past 20 years. This time, they weren't taking on a challenge. They were there to give back to the earth. Bodhi's teammates opened a suitcase filled with C4 explosives. It turned out that what Bodhi called giving back was actually burying the mine, returning it to the earth. Utah closed his eyes in anguish. What he had not wanted to believe had happened. Bodhi and his friends were indeed the same criminals from before. It was time for him to make a choice. Bodhi's group split into two teams. Bodhi led Utah to disrupt the security vehicle convoy, while the other two rode motorcycles up the mountain to plant the bomb. Bodhi drove the jeep, continuously crashing into the trucks carrying minerals. He even rammed one security vehicle off a cliff. When everything was set, Bodhi prepared to activate the remote control. Utah finally couldn't take it anymore. He revealed his true identity, but Bodhi pressed the activation button anyway. The mountaintop exploded, and countless rocks tumbled down. Bodhi hopped onto a motorcycle and sped down the slope. Utah quickly grabbed another motorcycle and followed. The two of them dodged the rolling rocks and raced into the dense forest. During the pursuit, Bodhi knocked Utah off course. Both of them fell into a small river. When Bodhi stood up, Utah had a gun pointed at him. In the tense confrontation, Bodhi revealed that the whole group had known Utah was a cop from the beginning. When Utah asked why they still allowed him to join, Bodhi simply replied, "Because I thought I could save you." Utah was brought back to FBI headquarters. His black boss was very displeased with him, as his actions had crossed a line. Not only did he fail to report Bodhi and his group's whereabouts to higher authorities to prevent the fourth major crime, but he had also become close to Samsara, Bodhi's adopted sister. Utah was suspended from duty. The boss also told him that the government had frozen the financial assets of Bodhi's sponsor, meaning they would not be able to continue committing crimes. But Utah, who knew Bodhi well, felt the opposite. He knew that Bodhi would definitely complete all the challenges. Freezing the finances would only force Bodhi to commit illegal activities to raise money. Sure enough, Utah's guess was right. Police surveillance systems showed several people in black clothing on motorcycles running through the streets of the city. They had appeared despite the arrest warrants. Utah guessed they were preparing to rob a bank. But today was the weekend, and only one bank on the main road at the top of the mountain was open. Utah was certain that Bodhi and his group would go to rob that bank. The black boss and Utah got into Pappas's car. Old man Pappas handed him a gun, outwardly stern but inwardly soft, saying he didn't want Utah to die in front of him. Despite his scruffy appearance, Pappas was sharp when the situation called for it. He didn't follow the main team, but took a shortcut up the mountain. When they reached the mountaintop, several police cars had surrounded the bank's front entrance. 3 masked men in black, armed with submachine guns, smashed the glass doors and engaged in a fierce gunfight with the police. Utah wanted to intervene, but no one was listening to him anymore. One of them removed his mask. It was Roach, Bodhi's teammate. He was hit by multiple bullets and died on the spot. The other 2 men in black threw flashbangs and escaped on motorcycles. Utah chased after one of the men in black. Thinking it was Bodhi, he fired at the motorcycle's tire. Bodhi abandoned the bike and ran for his life, jumping onto a sightseeing cable car. Realizing he couldn't catch up, Utah climbed onto the roof, leaping onto the cable car's roof. Utah broke the window and charged into the cabin, where he found the man in black preparing to shoot him. Utah was forced to fire first in self-defense. Utah approached and removed the man's mask, only to find it wasn't Bodhi, but Samsara. Utah was filled with both anguish and anger. He stepped out of the cable car and saw Bodhi standing at the opposite platform. The two locked eyes across the tracks. The two brothers who once embraced each other were now enemies on different sides of the line. Utah, furious, wanted to charge across the tracks to beat Bodhi to within an inch of his life. If it weren't for him, Samsara wouldn't have died. But a train speeding toward him stopped him in his tracks. When the train passed, Bodhi had vanished without a trace. Bodhi disappeared, and no one knew what his next move would be. Utah grabbed a map and began analyzing. He listed the locations where Bodhi had completed challenges on the map, continuously drawing on the blackboard. Finally, he figured out where Bodhi's next challenge destination would be. The first 6 challenges were all downward facing, but the 7th challenge, Dominating Fate, would go against gravity, upward. Bodhi would choose to free climb, without ropes or any protective equipment. Utah was certain that Bodhi would choose the place where he was born, Angel Falls in Venezuela. However, Venezuela was a country beyond the reach of the US. Therefore, Pappas, with his experience, secretly helped Utah get there. Angel Falls is the highest waterfall in the world, with a height of 979 meters. Bodhi and his last teammate, Gromit, had stood at the base of the falls. The vertical cliff was so high that it was truly intimidating. Gromit couldn't see a way up and felt a little scared. Bodhi, however, was captivated by the cliff. He even found it beautiful. Gromit didn't want to climb, so Bodhi didn't say anything. He took off his jacket and started climbing alone. At this point, Utah arrived. Gromit, wanting to escape Utah's pursuit, had no choice but to follow. Utah watched the two of them on the cliff, took a deep breath, changed into climbing gear, and began to climb. On the sheer 979-meter cliff, the three climbed without any protective gear. The cliff was nearly vertical at a 90-degree angle, leaving only tiny footholds for their fingers and toes. It was a process of risking their lives, battling death itself. At times, they had to change positions and leap with all their strength to reach the next foothold. Gromit also mustered the strength to jump, but his other hand couldn't find a hold, and both of his feet hung in mid-air. Gromit used one hand to cling to the cliff, desperately trying to get a grip with both hands, but it was futile. They were almost at the summit. Bodhi's last teammate had passed away. He glanced down at Utah, then turned and continued to climb. When Utah reached the top of the cliff, he was completely exhausted. He saw Bodhi standing at the edge of the precipice. The seventh challenge, dominating fate. Both of them had succeeded, but Utah still had to bring him back for justice. Bodhi told him it wasn't over yet, because he still had the eighth challenge, ultimate faith, to complete. After saying this, Bodhi suddenly leaned back and fell straight down the waterfall. Utah followed closely and jumped after him. Utah, his face battered and bruised, surfaced from the water. Miraculously, he had survived the fall from such a tremendous height. However, he couldn't find any trace of Bodhi. Pappas suggested that perhaps Bodhi's body had been carried away by the river downstream, but Utah knew deep down that Bodhi was still alive. 7 months later, the Pacific Ocean welcomed enormous waves unlike anything ever seen before. Utah, now an experienced FBI agent, was aboard a helicopter heading toward this raging sea. He landed on a small boat on the water, and the one rowing the boat was none other than Bodhi. It seemed that, after all, Bodhi hadn't died in that final jump. So why had he come back to the ocean once more? Because during the Life of Water challenge before, Bodhi hadn't completed it because he had saved Utah. Now, this was Bodhi's final challenge. Completing it would mean Bodhi had finished all 8 of the Ozaki challenges, but this wave was even higher than the last one. Plunging into it would mean he could never return. The two brothers exchanged their final goodbyes. Utah also gave up on arresting him. He returned to the helicopter, having fulfilled his part in letting Bodhi walk his own path. Bodhi locked the rudder of the small boat, and with a deafening roar, he plunged straight into the tsunami. In the end, Bodhi disappeared into the vast ocean. Bodhi's life may have come to an end, but the legend of the 8 Ozaki challenges spread far and wide, becoming a legend in the hearts of adventure, sports lovers, those who cherish the earth. Point Break, 2015, is a remake that focuses entirely on extreme sports and breathtaking action scenes. Instead of delving into the original crime plot, this version turns the series of robberies into a spiritual and philosophical journey, tied to the completion of the 8 Ozaki challenges as a way to give back to the earth. The movie's greatest strength lies in its stunning visual performance. From surfing on massive waves, high-speed skiing, wingsuit flying, to free-climbing waterfalls. However, the focus on dangerous stunts detracts from the development of the characters and their emotional depth. Particularly, the complex relationship between Utah and Bodhi lacks the intensity and intrigue seen in the original. In conclusion, this is a visually impressive film with extreme sports sequences, but it fails to deliver a story with depth and powerful emotions. That's the end of today's story. Thank you for watching the movie. What did you think of this film? Feel free to comment below.